Each week at this time we do something called a community moment, where someone from our community gets up and shares it could be a thought, it could be something, your personal story, your journey to free thought, it could be ideas that have been spurred from a book that you've been read. We've had all kinds of fascinating community moments, and today's volunteer is Ed Bitter, and he has people helping him, so I'm going to let him introduce his helpers, and we're going to bring up Ed, and you guys need, you have four, well, anyway, you need both mics, so both mics are live, so I'll turn it over to you guys.
Wow. Thank you very much, Mike. So, this is a selection from a book that I found really moving, and we're just going to present it. This is unrehearsed. We're not going to try to act, so we'll just try to get the story across as clearly as we can. Southern Afghanistan turns into an oven in the summer months. The heat is so dry it cracks your skin, and the light so blinding that it drives everyone inside by mid-morning. In the villages, there is no electricity, and Afghans live in dark rooms, often underground, which offer cool relief from the heat as soon as you duck in through the low doorway. Farmers sleep in the day and work their fields after sundown. A fierce heat still bounces off the hard-packed earth at night, and people sleep on the flat roofs of their houses or sit up late to catch the cooler air. So it was that Mohammed Sharif and his family entertained a large party of guests late into the night, celebrating the engagement of his 16-year-old son, Abdul Malik. They lived in the farming village of Kakrak in Uruzgan province. The villages have been early supporters of Mohammad Karzai and his stand against the Taliban. The brother of the groom, 25-year-old Mohammed Shah, had joined Karzai, as had their uncle, who had since been appointed a senior army commander in Kandahar. Over 200 people from their extended family were gathered at their home for the party. Women and children were together in the inner courtyard, while, as the tradition at Afghan weddings, the men congregated separately in the outer courtyard. They had eaten a meal of soup and mutton and rice pilau. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the women were seated on cushions of the long flat roof of the house, playing drums and singing the traditional wedding songs long banned under the Taliban regime. Young children were asleep in the rooms downstairs. Older ones were watching the dancing, eating sweets, and dashing about. The men were relaxing after cooking cauldrons of food for their guests, sitting on rugs and chatting. People were singing. We were drinking tea. Small boys were going around pouring tea for people, Mohammed Shah recalled.
Without warning, a fighter plane descended out of the black sky and slammed a missile into the roof where the women were sitting. A second later, another explosion burst into the men's courtyard, shredding guests with shards of metal. The women and children fled in a panic through the garden door and into an orchard as the rockets exploded around them. Cannon fire raked the compound walls. 11-year-old Sabu Gul was sitting on the roof with her mother when the first bomb struck. They threw themselves down the stairs into the courtyard. A second explosion struck them, knocking Sabu Gul unconscious. She woke up in the hospital in Kandahar, a day's drive away, her back and legs lacerated with shrapnel. She did not know that her mother had died in the attack. The airplane was very big, she told me. She was frightened to see the foreigner at her bedside. The children were running, they were scared, said Chinara, a 20-year-old sister of the groom who was watching the dancing in the courtyard when the plane struck. She was wounded but fled outside with everyone else.
The plane circled and attacked again, cutting down a group of women and children in the orchard. The grandmother of the family, Nezaka, had snatched up her grandson and pulled a wounded woman along by her shirt. They ran into the orchard and reached the far corner when another explosion showered them with shrapnel. Sadiqa, a slim 15-year-old girl, unhurt in the first strikes, sprinted out behind the house and through the fields. She hid in a dry river gully some distance away. Women were standing on the bank of the gully when the planes came around again and strafed their group. A bomb raised an enormous dust cloud in the field. Most of the women were killed. Sadiqa survived, wounded in both legs.
In the men's courtyard, late, a 35-year-old farmer was drinking tea with two other guests when the first bomb hit. One of his friends was killed instantly. The other two men rushed up out of the compound, but came under fire as they sought cover. Lake's second friend was cut down as they ran. Lake reached the field in front of the house and dove into a small ditch. The Americans were bombing the house and we couldn't believe it. We were running everywhere to hide. He recounted. Unknown to him, his wife and 3 children had been killed. Lake lay in the ditch until dawn as the planes circled again and again, pouring fire onto the fields and the neighboring farmhouses. Muhammad Shah, the brother of the bridegroom, was knocked off his feet by the first bombing, but escaped in the fields. There, he came under fire again and was badly wounded in the arm. He wandered back to the house and collapsed in a relative's arms.
Abdul Khalik, 24, was not even at the engagement party, but lived nearby. He was sleeping on the rooftop when the bombing began. He rushed downstairs and fled into the fields, thinking to get away from the houses that were the target. But planes were shooting into the fields, and he was struck in the hip and arm. I was frightened I was going to die, and I was desperate for water, he said. As the bombardment receded, he limped back home.
Villagers were collecting the dead and carrying their wounded to the village mosque, and he made his way there too. As the planes receded, Pirjan stepped in to check on his relative's house across the street from the engagement party. He found 7 children dead and wounded in the courtyard. 2 boys, Ahmed 7 and Shirin 13, lay dead where they had been sleeping on the rooftop. 5 more were wounded as they tried to hide. Sahib Jen, a 25-year-old, was one of the first to reach the groom's house after the bombardment. Bodies were laying all over the courtyards in the adjoining orchard, some of them in pieces. Human flesh hung from the trees. A woman's torso was lodged in an almond sapling. Cannon fire had gouged long scars into the mud walls of the compound. Missiles had blown wide holes in the flat tops of the buildings, and the bodies lay in the dust and rumble of the house. 7 children lay dead in the gate in the orchard. Sabit Jen knew every one of the dead. He named them at each spot as he walked through the compound several days after the attack. He found a 12-year-old boy lying under the archway in the men's courtyard, slain by a piece of shrapnel in his head. His name was Shirin. He was the son of Zahar Jen. He said, staring at the blood-stained ground. He carried the dead boy to the mosque.
The villagers collected dozens of bodies and carried scores of wounded to the mosque. They found body parts strewn about, human ears, teeth, a woman's skull in one corner, a hand tossed aside. 54 people died and more than 100 were wounded that night.
Sorry. According to custom, the engaged couple were not present at the party, and so they had survived, but their union was forever benighted.
As dawn broke, American and Afghan soldiers surrounded the village and advanced on foot, searching houses and detaining people. When they came right into the village and saw the dead women and children, they were very sad, and their attitude towards us changed, said Pierre John, who was helping to gather up the dead. They told me through a translator that they had made a mistake. They said, "We are sorry, but what's done we cannot undo."
At the mosque, the American soldiers found the wounded men Abdul Khalik and Muhammad. They came and asked, "Who was shooting?" I said. "No one was shooting," Abdul Khalik said later. Afghan officials, including Governor Jan Mohammed, Khan, arrived to investigate. They were collecting body parts in buckets, said the governor. I had driven to Kabul with a translator and a driver for 3 days over dusty, rutty roads. A team from Los Angeles Times had come to help us.
4 days after the bombardment, the place was still a scene of unspeakable gore. Blood stained the ground and putrefying flesh was still entangled amid the bright scarlet blossoms of a pomegranate tree. 5 miles away, a village called Sia Song had also come under bombardment that night. Villagers told us 6 people had been killed. It was a poor settlement of small mud houses. A woman named Jamala wept as she showed us a pile of bloody clothes in the courtyard. She pointed to the blood on the wall where her teenage son had fallen dead and a corner where she had found her daughter and grandson dead. A female neighbor also died. My grandson and daughter's mouths were full of dust, she said, pulling her veil across her face. Write about this so that it will stop, so they leave us in peace to pray and fast.
These villagers lived simple lives. Their houses were unfurnished. Everyone ate and slept on the floor. The women tended cows and chickens in the yard and cooked on outdoor stoves fired by animal dung. The children ran around barefoot and played games in the dust. These people were not Al-Qaeda. They were not remotely connected to international terrorism. They were not even Taliban. They were not hostile to us foreign journalists. Even after such unspeakable killings, they answered our questions and patiently walked us through the ruins. I would leave, my heart full to bursting.
The men were angry. They warned that the U.S. military had made a grave mistake. The 16-year-old groom, Abdul Malik, veered wildly between declaring undying enmity toward the Americans and intoning an acceptance of God's will.
In the hospital in Kandahar, we found 4 wounded men, including the sole surviving brother. This is the 3rd time that Americans have made the mistake on our district of Dehradu, and they did not kill any Taliban or arrest anyone, Mohammed said.
25 members of his extended family had been killed in the bombing. We were the first to help Hamid Karzai, so we did not think that they would bomb our village. And they did not find any did they find any weapons in the village? No, he added bitterly. Lake, the farmer who lost his wife and 3 children, said they had been firing a Kalashnikov in celebration. We were shooting from happiness, he said.
The attack on Kakrak was part of a large nighttime operation by U.S. forces involving several hundred troops in convoys of trucks and jeeps and airborne assaulting teams. The target was a suspected Taliban position north of the village. When a U.S. unit heading toward the target spotted gunfire, they called in airstrikes on Kakrak, even though it was not the intended target. Pilots had reported anti-aircraft fire from heavy machine guns at several positions along the valley during reconnaissance flights. Ground forces moving up the valley also reported gunfire at several other places that night. Villagers used to fire their guns at night when they heard the Americans' planes overhead sending arcs of red tracer rounds into the blackness. Residents told me later. Some were pro-Taliban and hated the Americans. Some would do it for fun. In Kakrak, however, they had no anti-aircraft gun. They had simply celebrated an engagement by firing a Kalashnikov into the sky, a favorite custom at weddings and parties.
The planes worked the skies for 2 hours. The AC-130 airplanes attacked 4 villages in the area, and a B-52 bomber dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on a hillside in a show of force. Troops then entered the village on foot, yet they found no Taliban positions in Kakrak. No heavy machine gun was found there, a U.S. military spokesman said afterwards. Kakrak was indeed loyal to Karzai.
2 targets of the operation were Mullah Omar and his operational commander, Mullah Barbadar, who had been reported sheltering further north, American officials said. The failure to catch any significant Taliban figures at Kakrak and its neighboring villages, combined with the devastating death toll, revealed an ineffectiveness of heavy-handed military fortes when the police and intelligence operations would have been more appropriate. Afghan villagers and officials asked the questions that would dog NATO for the rest of the decade, 2 of which Afghans which never received any satisfactory response. Were the airstrikes proportional to the threat? Mudal Rabni said he asked the question of the American commanders who visited the scene. Mullah Omar and Mullah Barbadar are just 2 people, and you bombed 4 villages. Why?
So this selection is from a book by Carlotta Gall, published on April 8, 2014, called The Wrong Enemy, America and Afghanistan, 2001 to 2014.